At 3:17 a.m., Claire stopped a transfer everyone else had approved. Hours later, 40 motorcycles surrounded the hospital. He would not survive that ride, the surgeon said. Then the road captain placed one question on the table. Why was an unstable man being moved at all? Do not move him. Claire Donnelly said it quietly, but the words stopped two transport attendants, one exhausted resident, and a rolling stretcher less than 8 feet from the ambulance doors. It was 3:17 a.m. at St. Alban County Medical Center, and Claire had already removed her identification badge, finished a 12-hour shift, and spent the last $4 in her pocket on coffee that tasted like burnt walnuts. She should have been driving home. She stayed. 40 minutes earlier, county paramedics had brought in an unidentified man found beside a 2016 Harley-Davidson Road King on Route 14, where freezing rain had turned the eastern curve into a sheet of glass. The motorcycle had suffered heavy visible damage, yet the rider's leather jacket was barely torn, creating the dangerous impression that he had escaped with only bruises and a fractured rib. He was about 58, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and marked by a pale scar running from his left temple to the edge of his gray beard. His name was Gideon Rourke. No one knew it yet. The ambulance inventory noted that no wallet had been recovered. His cellular phone had a shattered screen, and his weathered motorcycle vest had been sealed inside a clear property bag. A handwritten intake note described him as alert on arrival, stable after medication, and suitable for transfer to Bryan County Regional Medical Center, 67 miles away. Elaine Corbett, the night operations manager, had approved the transfer because St. Alban had only 2 monitored beds left, and a private transport team was already charging $186 for every additional half hour of waiting. The paperwork looked complete. Claire noticed what it missed. Gideon had been placed behind a pale blue curtain in temporary bay 6, an overflow space where one ceiling light flickered every 11 seconds and the air smelled of disinfectant, wet leather, and reheated chicken broth. As Claire passed on her way to the employee exit, the monitor produced 3 weak warning tones, paused, then repeated them. She stepped inside, expecting a loose sensor. Instead, she found Gideon staring at the ceiling with his jaw clenched, his breathing shallow, and his right hand gripping the blanket so tightly that the knuckles had turned white. His left hand was cold. Too cold. Claire checked his radial pulse, then placed a pressure cuff on his right arm and watched the machine settle at 118/74. Less than 2 minutes later, she repeated the reading on the same arm and got 92/58. Both hands were cool now. His pulse felt thinner, and the muscles beneath his left ribs had begun to tighten. The drop was not small. It was a warning. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked, leaning close enough for him to see her face. His eyes shifted toward her, but only a dry whisper escaped his mouth, followed by a swallow as though he could taste metal. "Road," he managed. Then his fingers closed around Claire's wrist. In the corridor, the transport attendants released the stretcher brakes, while Elaine reminded Claire that her shift had ended 17 minutes earlier and that unauthorized delays would be added to the department's monthly review. Claire clipped her identification badge back on her scrub pocket, then looked at the transfer form, the waiting ambulance, and the red identification band around Gideon's wrist. She took a black marker from her pocket and wrote across the plastic, 317, hold transfer, Donnelly. Using the hospital tablet, she uploaded a time-stamped photograph of the marked band to Gideon's chart and documented the same hold on the transfer form. Elaine's expression hardened. "You are stopping an approved transfer based on one reading?" Claire checked Gideon's pulse again, felt it weakening beneath her fingertips, and reached for the emergency call button. "No," she said. "I'm stopping it because no one checked twice." The emergency call brought Dr. Matthew Keene from the charting station at 3:19 a.m., still holding a paper cup of vending machine tea that smelled faintly of lemon and cardboard. He was 34, 10 hours into his shift, and already responsible for 21 patients spread across 14 treatment rooms and 7 temporary bays. He saw the transport crew, the marked wristband, and Elaine Corbett standing with the transfer authorization in her hand. Then he looked at Claire. "Tell me exactly what changed." Claire gave him the numbers without embellishment. 118/74 on the first reading, 92/58 less than 2 minutes later, pulse weakening, both hands cooling, breathing shallow, and new firmness beneath the left ribs. Dr. Keene repeated the measurements manually, while one attendant checked his watch and warned that the scheduled transport window was closing. Elaine pointed to the approved form. He was assessed less than an hour ago. The receiving facility has already accepted him. Dr. Keene did not answer. The manual reading came back worse. 86/52, with a heart rate of 128 and a pulse that was becoming difficult to feel. Gideon's skin had turned the gray color of wet cement, and a line of sweat gathered beneath his silver hair, despite the bay temperature being only 68 degrees. Claire loosened the blanket, checked his chest movement, and found a faint firmness beneath the lower edge of his ribs. It had not been documented. That changed everything. Dr. Keene ordered a bedside ultrasound, repeat blood work, and 2 large-bore intravenous lines. Elaine stepped closer. "You are creating a delay based on findings that have not been confirmed." Claire looked at the red wristband. "That is what confirmation is for." For 30 seconds, no one moved. Then Gideon opened his eyes. His pupils struggled to focus beneath the harsh ceiling light, but his grip found Claire's sleeve again. "Bike," he whispered. "Safe." Claire glanced toward the sealed property bag where his keys rested beside a cracked black phone and a folded gas station receipt dated less than 2 hours earlier. She leaned closer. "Your motorcycle is secured. Stay with me." His fingers relaxed. The ultrasound machine arrived at 3:24. Dr. Keene pressed the probe beneath Gideon's ribs, adjusted the angle, and went silent. A dark crescent appeared where it should not have been. He checked again from a second position, then a third. "There is free fluid," he said. Elaine's expression changed, but only slightly. "How much?" "Enough that he is not leaving this building." The transport attendants locked the stretcher brakes and began returning their equipment to the ambulance. One of them, a white-haired man named Carl, quietly admitted that Gideon had complained of deep back pressure when they first moved him, but the discomfort had been recorded as soreness from the crash. Claire asked when. Carl checked the digital log on his tablet. 2:51, nearly half an hour before the transfer was approved. Dr. Keene canceled the transfer, activated the hospital's trauma response, and paged Dr. Rebecca Sloan, the surgeon already covering emergency calls that night. The operator sent the page twice when the first alert failed to confirm. Dr. Keene took the call while Claire supplied the latest pressure, pulse, ultrasound finding, and the exact time written on a wristband. Dr. Sloan answered before Claire finished. "Do not put him in an ambulance. I'm 11 minutes away." At 3:29, Gideon's heart rate rose to 132. His oxygen level dropped 4 points. The monitor traced a faster, thinner rhythm while Claire adjusted the line, and Dr. Keene called for 2 units of uncross-matched blood. Elaine remained near the curtain, now holding the transfer form against her chest instead of displaying it. "This still has to be documented," she said. Claire met her eyes. "It already is." She lifted Gideon's wrist just enough for the black writing to show beneath the fluorescent light. 3:17, hold. "Transfer, Donnelly." Then Gideon's body went still, and the pressure reading disappeared from the monitor. Dr. Keene checked his carotid pulse, found none, and called for compressions. Every person in Temporary Bay 6 understood how close the ambulance doors had come to closing behind him. Dr. Keene began chest compressions at 3:30 a.m., while Claire opened the emergency cart, connected a second fluid line, and called for the blood that had been ordered moments earlier. The first unit arrived at 3:33 in a clear, insulated carrier marked for emergency release. Gideon's pulse returned after 47 seconds, weak but measurable, and the monitor settled into an uneven rhythm of 124 beats per minute. He was alive. Barely. Dr. Rebecca Sloan entered Temporary Base 6 at 3:38, wearing navy scrubs beneath an unbuttoned winter coat that carried the smell of cold rain and peppermint gum. She reviewed the ultrasound, examined the growing firmness beneath Gideon's left ribs, and watched his pressure fall despite the first unit of blood. The positive trauma scan, recent loss of pulse, and brief response to resuscitation left no time for CT. At 3:44, Dr. Sloan ordered the operating room open for emergency abdominal surgery. Claire moved with the team through the narrow corridor, one hand controlling Gideon's bloodline and the other holding the stretcher rail. Elaine followed far enough behind to observe, but not close enough to assist. Dr. Sloan looked at Gideon's falling pressure and the dark fluid visible on the bedside scan. Another 20 minutes in transport, and we might not have had a patient to bring back. Claire did not look toward Elaine. She looked at the red wristband. Gideon needed surgery, blood, and someone who could answer questions about his medical history. He had none. His cracked phone would not power on. No wallet had been recovered, and the hospital still had no confirmed identity or medical contact. Claire returned to the property room at 3:51 and opened the sealed bag with a technician present. The leather jacket weighed nearly 9 pounds when wet. It smelled of road salt, gasoline, and old cedar. Inside the left lining, behind a small zippered pocket, Claire found a laminated emergency card no larger than a credit card. It identified the patient as Gideon Rourke, listed his date of birth, blood type, and medications, and named Silas Brenner as his healthcare agent under an advance directive filed with his clinic. The number connected on the fourth ring. "Who is this?" a deep male voice asked. Before disclosing any medical information, Claire asked the caller to confirm Gideon's full name, date of birth, and the clinic listed on the emergency card. Silas answered all three correctly. Claire then identified herself and the hospital before giving him the essential facts: serious internal bleeding and emergency surgery. There was a pause long enough for Claire to hear wind moving across the caller's microphone. "Is he awake?" Silas asked. "Not now." Another pause. "Is he alone?" Claire looked through the glass toward the operating corridor, where Gideon's stretcher was being prepared for transfer to surgery. "I'm still here," she said. Silas exhaled slowly. "Then he is not alone." Silas confirmed Gideon's medication history, previous shoulder surgery, and the clinic where his advance directive was filed. Dr. Keene matched the information to the records available under Gideon's confirmed identity. At 4:02, Gideon was taken toward the operating room. The laboratory tube system failed at the same moment, leaving 2 urgent samples sitting in a plastic carrier beside the nurse's station. Claire picked them up and ran them down 3 flights of stairs herself because the service elevator was locked for maintenance. The basement corridors smelled of bleach, warm dust, and tomato soup from a vending machine near the staff entrance. She delivered the samples at 4:08. The preliminary results returned 7 minutes later. Gideon's hemoglobin had fallen sharply, confirming the scale of the blood loss, and the result was relayed directly to the operating room team to guide the transfusion plan. Claire should have gone home. Instead, she stood outside the operating suite with the red transfer form folded in her pocket and Gideon's damaged phone resting beside her on a metal chair. At 4:18, Claire sent Silas one brief update. Gideon was in emergency surgery, and the hospital would contact him when the surgeon had news. At 4:26, through the rain-streaked windows at the end of the corridor, a single headlight turned into the hospital parking lot. The motorcycle moved slowly, stopped beneath the farthest lamp, and shut down. One white-haired man in a black leather vest remained beside it, facing the emergency entrance. 9 minutes later, a second motorcycle appeared. By 4:41 a.m., 5 motorcycles stood beneath the far parking lamps, each separated by one empty space, each pointed toward the exit, each rider remaining beside his machine. The first man was Silas Brenner, 64, white-haired, broad through the shoulders, and wearing a black leather vest darkened by freezing rain. He checked his phone once, looked toward the surgical wing, and gave the arriving riders the same instruction. "Park clean, block nothing, speak to no one unless they speak first." No one argued. At 4:47, hospital security supervisor Owen Mercer saw the motorcycles through camera 12 and left his office carrying a radio, a flashlight, and a ring of 23 keys. He had worked at St. Alden for 11 years and had handled intoxicated visitors, custody disputes, and one power failure that trapped 46 people in elevators. He had never watched a group like this arrive without speaking. 7 motorcycles became 11. 11 became 16. A 2009 Harley-Davidson Street Glide rolled in beside a 2018 Indian Chieftain, followed by two older Road Kings carrying winter salt across their fenders. Most of the riders were between 50 and 70, with gray beards, weathered faces, and scars visible beneath wet collars. They looked severe. They behaved with exact restraint. At 4:53, Owen approached Silas near the outer walkway and stopped 12 feet away. "This is hospital property. You cannot obstruct emergency access." Silas pointed toward the open ambulance lane, the vacant fire zone, and the carefully spaced row of motorcycles. "We have not. Why are you here?" "A man named Gideon Rourke is in surgery." Owen tightened his grip on the radio. "Only immediate family may wait inside." Silas glanced at the riders behind him. "This is his family." The answer reached Elaine Corbett through Owen's radio less than a minute later. She was standing at the operations desk reviewing the delayed transfer report, and the word family made her look toward the windows. 20 headlights now reflected across the wet pavement. She ordered the east entrance locked, restricted elevator access to the emergency floor, and instructed reception staff not to release any information. Claire heard the order while returning from the laboratory with Gideon's latest results. "They have not entered the building," she said. Elaine did not turn around. "They're creating pressure by being here. They're standing in a parking lot." Dozens of men do not gather at a hospital before sunrise without a purpose. Claire looked through the glass. There were 23, not 40, and every engine was off. At 5:02, Silas checked Claire's 4:18 message again. Gideon remained in surgery, and no further update had arrived. He read it twice, slipped the phone into his vest, and walked along the line of riders. One man asked whether they should move closer to the entrance. Another worried rider took 2 steps toward the doors when the operating room lights changed. Silas caught his sleeve and shook his head. "We helped Gideon by giving them room." The rider returned to his motorcycle. Silas shook his head. "We stay where they can see us, and we give them no reason to fear us." Another rider opened a saddlebag containing bottled water, hand warmers, and a folded sheet listing blood types. 7 members were O negative. 11 were O positive. Silas sent the list to Claire with one sentence: "Available if needed." At 5:11, the count reached 31. Security added 2 guards to the lobby. At 5:19, 36 motorcycles occupied the north lot. At 5:27, a silver-haired rider arrived on a 2012 Harley-Davidson Electra Glide, parked beside the final open space, and became number 39. The eastern sky remained winter black when a last motorcycle appeared at the hospital entrance, its single headlight moving through the rain. It moved slowly past the ambulance bay, turned beneath the red emergency sign, and joined the others without blocking a single lane. At 5:34 a.m., 40 motorcycles occupied the north, east, and visitor lots, visible from every public wing of St. Alban County Medical Center, while leaving the ambulance lanes and fire routes completely open. Not one rider crossed the curb. At 5:38 a.m., Owen Mercer stepped outside with 2 security officers and found Silas Brenner waiting exactly where he had been told to remain. Rainwater ran from the shoulders of Silas's vest, collected along the scar across his right hand, and dropped onto the concrete in slow, measured intervals. Behind him, 40 motorcycles formed careful rows across the north, east, and visitor lots. Rainwater reflected from 40 fuel tanks, chrome fenders, and dark windshields. Not one occupied an ambulance lane. "You need to reduce the group," Owen said. "Patients and staff believe the hospital is being surrounded." Silas looked toward the locked east entrance. "We were asked not to enter. We have not entered. Your presence is causing concern." "Then tell us where to stand without causing concern." Owen had expected resistance. The calm answer left him searching for a new argument. He pointed toward the far edge of the north lot, 70 yards from the emergency doors, and asked the riders nearest the ambulance route to move. Silas raised 2 fingers. 8 men started their engines, relocated in single file, and shut them down again within 90 seconds. The riders relocated without argument and returned to their places beside the motorcycles. Silas returned his attention to Owen. The lane is wider now. We remain until we hear whether Gideon is alive. Inside, the new day shift staff entered through the south doors and passed rumors faster than patient reports. Some claimed the riders had demanded access to the surgical floor. Others said security had discovered weapons in the parking lot. Neither story was true. Claire watched the lot through a narrow window beside the operating suite and saw men passing paper cups of coffee, tightening rain covers over seats, and directing arriving staff toward open parking spaces. One rider used a towel to dry a bench for an elderly visitor. Another picked up 3 pieces of windblown trash and placed them in a bin. Their appearance was severe, but their behavior remained measured and disciplined. At 5:46, a tall biker named Warren Pike approached the reception desk alone, stopping behind the blue privacy line. He placed a folded sheet on the counter and stepped back. The paper contained 40 names, telephone numbers, and blood types. 7 riders were O negative, 11 were O positive, 9 were A positive, and the remaining 13 represented 4 other groups. A note at the bottom read, "Volunteers available for hospital-approved screening if additional donations are requested." The receptionist carried the sheet to Claire. Claire studied the ages beside the names. The youngest man was 47. The oldest was 70. Several had listed medications that would prevent donation, but they had come anyway. "They think he may need more blood," the receptionist said. Claire folded the sheet once. They came prepared to give it. Elaine Corbett appeared behind them, holding a printed incident report. The document already described the gathering as an organized disruption linked to Claire's unauthorized decision to stop the transfer. It stated that her direct contact with Silas had triggered an escalating security risk and exposed St. Alden to potential liability. Claire read the first page twice. "I called the healthcare agent listed on his emergency card." Elaine's voice remained even. "You contacted an outside representative without routing the call through administration." "I contacted the person responsible for his medical history." 40 motorcycles are now outside. Claire placed the donor list beside Elaine's report. "And every emergency lane is open." Elaine did not touch the paper. She informed Claire that once Gideon left surgery, her access badge would be suspended pending a formal review. The decision included removal from the next 3 night shifts, representing 36 unpaid hours and nearly $1,140 in lost wages. Claire felt the number more sharply than the threat. Her rent was due in 6 days. She looked through the window at Silas, standing beneath the cold parking lot light, holding 40 men in place without a single raised voice. Then she looked at the red transfer form in her pocket. "You can suspend my badge," Claire said, "but you cannot change what happened at 3:17. At that moment, the operating room doors opened, and Dr. Sloan stepped into the corridor with her surgical cap in one hand and deep mask lines across her face. Dr. Sloan removed her surgical cap at 5:56 a.m. and looked first at Claire, then at Elaine. "He made it through the operation," she said, "but the next 12 hours matter." Gideon had lost nearly 40% of his circulating blood volume before the bleeding was controlled. He had received 4 units of blood, 2 liters of warm fluid, and emergency surgery to repair the damage near his spleen. Another 20 minutes outside the operating room could have changed everything. Claire pressed her fingers against the folded transfer form in her pocket. She felt relief. Then she remembered the incident report waiting at the operations desk. At 6:08, Gideon was moved to the intensive care unit, where a ventilator maintained his breathing and 3 medication pumps stood beside the bed. Claire was permitted to enter for less than 2 minutes. His face looked smaller without the tension in his jaw, but the pale scar along his left temple remained unmistakable beneath the white hospital light. The red wristband was still attached. The word she had written at 3:17 had blurred slightly near the clasp, yet the time remained readable. Outside the room, Claire opened Gideon's electronic chart and began reconstructing the night minute by minute. The first concerning note appeared at 2:51, when transport attendant Carl recorded Gideon's complaint of deep pressure in his back. At 2:57, Dr. Keene entered a request for repeat blood pressure checks. At 3:03, A nurse from another bay documented another falling pressure reading and a pulse above 120. The change should have triggered a clinical reassessment. Instead, while that reassessment remained unresolved, the transfer status had been advanced to ready 4 minutes later. Claire compared the earlier clinical entry with the current transfer screen and saw that the case had been cleared to move despite the unresolved warning. Her account did not allow access to the full audit trail, so she printed both entries and marked the discrepancy for compliance review. At 6:21, Claire found Marjorie Lane, the overnight transfer coordinator, sitting alone near the staff cafeteria with a cup of cinnamon oatmeal that had gone cold. Marjorie was 56, wore narrow silver glasses, and had worked at St. Aldan for 18 years. When Claire showed her the conflicting clinical and transfer entries, Marjorie lowered the spoon. Elaine wanted the transfer completed before 6, she said. Why? Marjorie looked toward the empty corridor before answering. Bryer County had agreed to accept Gideon based on the initial stabilization note, and St. Aldan's emergency department was already 6 patients above its overnight target. Every delayed transfer increased the average bed clearance time, one of the performance measures reviewed by hospital leadership each quarter. Elaine had not ordered anyone to ignore a medical emergency. She had treated the warning as an obstacle to a completed transfer. She said the patient was stable enough when the first form was signed, Marjorie whispered. She said we could not let one unidentified rider hold a monitored bed all night. Claire closed the chart. Gideon had been reduced to 1 occupied bed, 1 transfer slot, and a number on a performance dashboard. At 6:37, she carried the printed clinical timeline and the conflicting chart entries to Silas, who had been verified as Gideon's healthcare agent and allowed into a private consultation room. Silas read every timestamp without speaking. Then he placed the pages flat on the table with both scarred hands. He has spent 20 years sitting beside men who had no one else, Silas said. He explained that Gideon had driven 300 miles to stay with a rider recovering from heart surgery, slept for 4 nights in a plastic chair after another man's factory accident, and quietly paid $2,300 toward rehabilitation equipment for a member who could no longer work. Of the 40 men outside, 27 had once awakened in a hospital and found Gideon waiting. He always stayed. Until someone came, Silas said. Tonight, no one knew he was here. Claire looked through the glass toward the rows of silent motorcycles. Someone knew at 3:17. Silas lifted his eyes. Before he could answer, Elaine entered with the completed suspension notice and asked Claire to surrender her badge. Claire looked at the suspension notice. She looked at Elaine's open hand. Then she removed the badge from her scrub pocket without surrendering it. Before you take this, Claire said, the medical record needs to be preserved. Elaine's jaw tightened. This is not a negotiation. Silas remained seated at the consultation table, his scarred hands resting beside the audit pages. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand. He simply asked, as Gideon's healthcare agent, I am requesting that his transfer records be preserved before any witness is removed from duty. Elaine turned toward him. This is an internal personnel matter. The transfer of an unstable patient is a patient matter. At 6:42 a.m., Dr. Sloan and Dr. Keene joined the meeting while Owen Mercer stood at the door. Carl's time-stamped transport record and written statement had already been forwarded electronically to the hospital administrator. Outside the window, 39 bikers remained beside their motorcycles while one rider waited near the donor entrance, ready if the blood bank called. No one moved toward the hospital. No one needed to. Silas placed his phone on the table and opened the message Claire had sent at 4:18, well before most riders arrived. It contained no invitation, no request for support, and no criticism of the hospital. It stated only that Gideon was in emergency surgery and that the hospital would contact Silas when the surgeon had news. Your report says Nurse Donnelly contacted us and created an organized disruption, Silas said. That message created nothing. I called the men. Elaine folded her arms. 40 club members surrounded a medical facility. Owen answered before Silas could. They complied with every instruction. They moved 8 motorcycles when asked, maintained both emergency lanes, and did not enter restricted areas. The hospital administrator opened Carl's time-stamped transport record on the conference room screen. The digital record showed his crew had begun moving Gideon at 3:14. Claire stopped them at 3:17. Silas's first motorcycle did not enter the parking lot until 4:26. The difference was 69 minutes. Dr. Keene opened Gideon's chart and displayed the emergency call log. Claire activated the second assessment at 3:19, initiated repeat measurements under the trauma protocol, and supplied Dr. Keene with the findings used to contact Dr. Sloan before any biker reached St. Alban. Dr. Sloan slid her operative summary toward Elaine. He had active internal bleeding. He would not have survived a 67-mile transfer. Elaine glanced at the documents, but did not pick them up. That does not excuse bypassing administration. Claire opened the time-stamped nursing photograph she had uploaded to Gideon's chart at 3:20. The image showed the red wristband still fastened around his arm, with the black writing clearly visible. 3:17. Hold transfer. Donnelly. She placed the printed photograph beside the suspension notice. The decision happened here, Claire said, touching the time. Not when they arrived. A compliance officer entered carrying the secured audit report, while Marjorie Lane followed with her written transfer statement. The audit showed that Elaine had overridden the unresolved bed flow alert and marked the transfer as ready before the required clinical reassessment was completed. Marjorie then confirmed that Elaine had instructed the transfer desk to complete Gideon's move before the morning bed review, even though the required clinical reassessment was still pending. The room became still. Silas finally stood, not to threaten anyone, but to move his chair back into place. "I have one question," he said. "Why was an unstable man being moved at all?" The on-call hospital administrator reviewed the wristband photograph, the emergency call log, Carl's transport record, and the secured audit report. He suspended Elaine's access to patient flow systems pending a formal compliance investigation, then looked at the badge in Claire's hand. "Keep it." Outside, 40 men waited in complete silence while the hospital's version of the night changed one timestamp at a time. At 7:04 a.m., Dr. Sloan authorized a limited update for Silas. Gideon remained critical, but his blood pressure had stabilized, the bleeding had been controlled, and the early post-operative checks showed no sign of renewed bleeding. Silas listened without interrupting. He asked whether Gideon needed more donors. He asked whether the intensive care unit required anything the club could provide. Then he thanked Dr. Sloan and stepped through the east entrance alone. 40 men looked toward him. Silas raised one open hand. The men received the news with lowered heads and quiet relief before beginning the orderly work of leaving. 8 motorcycles started first, followed by another 8 90 seconds later, so the sound would not overwhelm the ambulance bay. The pattern continued until the carefully arranged rows began to disappear from the wet parking lot. Before departing, Warren Pike delivered 4 cardboard boxes to the reception desk. They contained 72 breakfast sandwiches, 40 cups of coffee, bottled water, and fruit for the nurses, technicians, cleaners, security officers, and transport staff who had worked through the night. The receipt came to just under $500. Nothing was labeled for Claire. Nothing required a photograph. The donor list remained with the blood bank, along with a note stating that the men could return within 30 minutes if needed. At 7:22, the on-call hospital administrator formally confirmed that Claire's suspension had been withdrawn. Her 3 scheduled shifts would remain active, and every minute worked after 3 a.m. would be entered as approved overtime. The decision did not feel like victory. Claire had been awake for nearly 16 hours. Her shoes smelled of antiseptic and basement dust, and the bitter coffee on the consultation table had formed a thin skin across the surface. She signed her statement anyway. Elaine was removed from operational duties, pending a review of 12 patient transfers completed during the previous 90 days. Her access to clinical records was suspended, but she was not publicly escorted through the hospital or confronted by the riders. She collected her gray coat, placed her administrative card in an envelope, and left through the south entrance while the compliance team secured the electronic audit history. By 7:46, only 3 motorcycles remained outside. Silas's black 2015 Road Glide, Warren Street Glide, and an older blue Road King belonging to a rider assigned to retrieve Gideon's damaged machine from county storage. Claire returned to the intensive care unit at 8:03. Gideon was awake for less than a minute, still intubated and unable to lift his head from the pillow. His gray eyes opened when Claire said his name. He looked at her badge, then at the red wristband still fastened around his arm. His lips shaped one silent question around the breathing tube. Men? Claire leaned closer. They came. Gideon's brow tightened, forming a second question without sound. Trouble? She shook her head. No, they followed every rule we gave them. His eyes moved toward the window, though the parking lot could not be seen from the bed. He lifted his fingers slightly, asking how many. 40, Claire told him. Recognition softened his eyes. He could not smile around the breathing tube, but his fingers closed weakly around the edge of the blanket as Claire told him about the donor list, the food, and the coffee. Claire waited until his breathing steadied. Then she told him the truth he had not been conscious to witness. They did not come to frighten anyone. They just refused to leave you here alone. Gideon's fingers moved across the sheet until they found the edge of the red wristband. Outside, Silas started the last motorcycle still facing the intensive care wing, waited until Claire appeared behind the glass, and gave one slow nod before riding away into the pale morning. 4 months later, Claire began another night shift at St. Alban County Medical Center at 7 p.m. The winter rain had been replaced by early spring mist, but the emergency department still smelled of disinfectant, stale coffee, and tomato soup from the basement vending machine. Much had changed. A new transfer policy now allowed any registered nurse to place a 15-minute medical hold when a patient showed a significant change in vital signs. Every hold required a second clinical assessment, not permission from an administrative office. The hospital also completed a review of 12 transfers approved during Elaine Corbett's final 90 days in operations. 3 cases were referred for additional quality review, and Elaine was reassigned away from patient flow decisions after the investigators confirmed that performance targets had influenced clinical urgency ratings. She was not publicly shamed. She simply no longer had the authority to reduce a medical warning to a number on a dashboard. Claire's record was cleared completely. She received $285 in approved overtime, not a reward, only the wages she had earned by staying beyond her shift. She used part of it toward replacing 2 worn tires on her 2011 Honda Civic and contributed the remainder toward a better coffee machine for the night staff. At 11:43 p.m., the east entrance opened. Gideon Rourke walked inside using a black aluminum cane. He had lost 23 pounds, his silver hair had grown slightly longer, and the scar along his left temple looked sharper against his thinner face. He wore a plain charcoal jacket instead of his leather vest. No crowd followed him. No engines filled the parking lot. Claire stepped from behind the nurse's station. "You are supposed to be resting." Gideon glanced at the cane. "This is resting compared to last month." His voice remained rough, but it was steady. He told her that he could walk half a mile, climb 8 stairs without assistance, and begin a supervised return-to-riding evaluation once his rehabilitation team cleared his balance and core strength. His damaged 2016 Road King had been declared reparable, though the final estimate reached $11,260. Gideon did not mention replacing it. He placed a small rectangular frame on the counter. Inside was the red wristband, flattened beneath glass. Claire's black writing remained visible. 317. Hold transfer, Donnelly. Beneath it, engraved on a narrow silver plate, were 3 words. "You looked twice." Claire stared at the frame. "You kept this." "I asked the discharge nurse to save it when they removed it," Gideon said. Gideon set 2 cups beside it. One contained black coffee. The other held coffee with 1 packet of sugar and enough cream to soften the bitter taste. "The night receptionist told him how you take it," Gideon said. Claire looked through the glass doors. Silas stood beside his black Road Glide beneath the parking lot light, while a gray pickup waited at the curb to take Gideon home. There were no 39 other riders that night. Only Silas waited outside, just as Gideon had once waited beside so many hospital beds. Claire had been 17 minutes past her shift when she turned back toward Temporary Base 6. The club remembered that she had chosen not to keep walking. Gideon touched the edge of the frame. "We cannot repay what you did." Claire shook her head. "Then do not call it repayment." Gideon considered that, nodded once, and turned toward the door. Before leaving, he looked back at the crowded treatment board. "Anyone alone tonight?" Claire glanced toward Temporary Bay 4, where an older man waited for his daughter to drive 60 miles through fog. "One patient may need company." Gideon returned to the waiting room, lowered himself into a plastic chair, and placed his cane beside him. Silas came inside, carrying 2 more coffees. Neither man asked for recognition. They simply stayed until someone came. If you believe in the true brotherhood and kindness of bikers, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.